What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And know that I'm the host of Epic Conversations, and this is a place for epic conversations. I was the 2018 award winner in the innovation category handed out by the Black Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And it is Friday night, June 14th, and we're having another new friend come on the Dr. Vibe Epic Conversation platform. Let me tell you a little about this outstanding lady. Venchele is the author of Journey to Redemption and Faith in the Amazon best-selling book, Passport to Self-Discovery, Volume 2. She's the founder of MESFAMI Care Incorporated. She's demonstrated leadership and innovation in public health, health equity, communications, public outreach, social inclusion, and diversity, among others. She's an experienced writer, a native French speaker with cognate education in public health. Focus is to improve accessibility to health services while supporting education, economic empowerment, and counseling as critical building blocks which empower families to survive through life-changing events. The organization she represents facilitates community institutions by voluntarily supporting families with the knowledge, skills, and services required to survive changing social and economic environments. She's had a lot of writing exposure from everything from the platforms like the Good Men Project, the National Medical Association, Harness Magazine, YMK, The Creative Guru, Block News, the Minority Business Finance Scoop, the Above Ground Railroad, Black Owned and Operated, Greater Diversity News, Success Queens Scoop, Black News Zone, Peace Corps Press Release, DMV Daily, Black Slate, Thrive Global, Gratitude Circle, Medium, LinkedIn, and the newsletter of Peace Corps Senegal, Simmons College, and Friends of the Library, Montgomery County. Wow, that is a lot. But tonight, she's going to share a little bit about herself and a great article that she's written for the Good Men Project called The Struggle of Black Men with the Mental Health Industry. So we'd like to welcome for the first time and not the last time, Venchele. How are you this evening?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is mine, and quite the extensive bio. You don't stay still.
I don't think I do. I think that all of these different components, have led me to a given path, which is to serve. And, I'm definitely going to continue to do so in whatever form or shape it may look like in the future, for sure.
Excellent. And just want to shout out Bobby, who's watching this Epic Conversation live on the Get Vocal platform. As always, thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to share and watch another Epic Conversation. Absolutely. So we've heard about all your great stuff that you doing professionally. Give us a little background growing up. Where did you grow up, etc. family?
So I was born in the U.S., specifically in Florida, and then right after, probably like a year after, my parents moved to Haiti because that's where we're from. And I've lived there for half of my life. Went to a private school there. I definitely had a very easygoing lifestyle. And then back in 2000, when there was ongoing violence in Haiti, I came back to the States to finish my studies, my high school and college studies, as you mentioned, at Simmons in Boston, Massachusetts. But when I look at my background, I've always been at the forefront of health inequities that happened or that occurred within different neighborhoods. And so I think that by growing up in a developed country, it instilled in me a sense of compassion, for those who don't have much, and then also try to figure out or try to understand the gap and where I can fill this gap, whether it's in terms of knowledge or resources. And I think that, fast forwarding to my Peace Corps experience, it allowed me to explore that. and to think about, how to properly make those assessments and evaluations, and also being culturally competent, ensuring that the projects that are being implemented are sustainable and relevant to the community I'm serving. And this, again, this is just a reflection of all, my cultural background and all of the experiences I've had before joining the Peace Corps, and now in my master's program.
Excellent. I'd love if you could reflect back to your life in Haiti. What was that like, and how much of your life spent in Haiti is part of who you are today?
I think growing up in Haiti definitely, like I said, instilled in me a sense of compassion, and also, provided a platform for me to explore, what my purpose was or what my ministry was at the time. But then again, I was very careful to say that I grew up in Haiti for half of my life. So that's from 1 year old to 11 years old. And I'm not really sure there's much introspection work that was done during that time. But I had the exposure. And I think that looking back on the exposure of seeing a stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots, it really made me think about, why is there such a huge difference, and who is doing something about it? But I think it was not until later on I realized that you can't wait for other people to create that change. You have to start yourself. Because by waiting, then maybe like you will not see the changes that you would want to be seen implemented in that given community. And so I definitely think that me living in Haiti really created how you say that, like an environment for me to really understand what my ministry was at the time. I knew I wanted to do something in health. I just didn't know which aspect of health care I wanted to focus on. So.
So when you got the thought about getting into health, how did that come about? And was any of that influence from people who raised you, parents who raised you?
Well, in my family, we had doctors. My grandfather was a general primary care physician, and my maternal grandmother was a nurse. And so we had people in the family who worked in the healthcare sector. But then again, by the time I was born, my grandfather had already passed, and so I wasn't really sure, the extent, the breadth, and the depth of the work that he had done. So, besides hearing it from my own father, but I think that when I went to Simmons, originally I was a pre-med major, and I was majoring in biology. And then something just inside me just kept thinking, you know what? I think I really want to focus on population health. And fortunately, we had a public health program at Simmons. And so with the help of my academic advisors and a couple people who I had spoken to, I felt like this is where I could make an impact. And so during my junior year in college, I decided to go study abroad for almost a year in Spain, Grenada, Spain. And then when I came back, when I was doing some research, trying to think about the next steps, I stumbled on a friend who had done the Peace Corps. And so she was talking to me about her experiences, and I thought to myself, well, maybe this might be a good fit. Maybe this is the crux of, the culmination of all the work that I had done before. And I applied, and after a year, I was sent to Senegal because of my healthcare background and because I'm a native French speaker. And during that time, it really helped me understand the not just the realities of living in abject poverty, but also the people who are coming in, or organizations coming in and implementing these programs, like they have a responsibility to do it right. And I don't want to put pressure on anyone, but I think there is a huge push or a huge on doing the proper assessment and evaluations on what needs to get done. Separating, making, marking the difference between what is a need versus what is a want, and then also including the people you are serving in the decision-making process. And this is something that I was very, very much in tune with when I was in my community. Like every single project was vetted by them. Because again, like when I came to my community, I did like a survey to assess what the current challenges were, and if there were any opportunities for improvement. And so in every step of the process, they were aware. We had community meetings, between with me and the organizations I was working with at the time, so that we can talk about where we can meet each other halfway, and also if those projects were culturally relevant, because part of building sustainable projects in a community, especially when you're the only American living in that community, is through building trust. And so this is what we were able to accomplish many projects, including but not excluding building a community health hospital that's serving more than 1,200 inhabitants, building a community library, instituting like a system where we used to, I trained, it was one of the nurses and I trained members within the community on different health topics, based on the assessment that I had made in the survey. And after they vetted that what we had identified were accurate, and I trained, and so we trained them in those different health topics, and then we would go from house to house on a bi-weekly basis to deliver these health talks.
Right.
And just have these small groups of small community group conversations.
Okay. I just want to interrupt you. And at what age were you doing this?
So I went to the Peace Corps, I believe, at the age of 21.
Okay. So where did you get the thought process, the drive to do that? Because not every person that's 21 has the vision or has the passion to do that. Where did that passion come from?
I mean, I would say that it comes from my cultural backgrounds. I mean, if you look at the history of Haiti, if you look at, the struggles that, my people have gone through, and not just before, but throughout history, we are a resilient community. And I think like this is where I have drawn my strength from, because I can say that I drew it from my parents, but I have to look at the bigger picture. My resilience stems from the strength and the courage of the brave men and women who paved the way before I even was a thought. And so that's where I draw my inspiration from. And then also that's why I go back to when I feel lost or stuck somewhere. Like that's why I always have to remind myself of where my parents came from, of my cultural heritage. Because again, there's this duality to my cultural background. I'm American, but I grew up in another country. And so I have to, fuse. I think my whole life has been trying to fuse those two together, trying to find meaning in both, trying to find what worked in one, what works and what doesn't work in both worlds. And, and pick your battles and see what you can do with the thing that you actually take from these two different cultures. and make it work.
Excellent. So share with us what your experience was like in the Peace Corps.
So my experience, so actually when I joined the Peace Corps, it's a 2-year contract. I ended up staying there for 3 years. But when I went to, I have to say, like the scariest moment was the first day when you get dropped off because there's a 3-month period where you get trained, in the local language. And in Senegal, there are many local languages, even though the national languages are Wolof and French. And so in terms of the French part, I had that already squared away. But then I had to learn this wonderful language, which is not spoken by many people in Senegal, called Mandinka. And during those 3 months of training, I was learning Mandinka. Mind you, I didn't even know I was going to end up in one of these communities in the southern part of Senegal. But that's, again, that was the reason why I joined. I wanted to take on a challenge. And then after those 3 months, and by then they had already made the decision of where I was going to live. I have to say the scariest moment was when the Peace Corps bus, took me to my community. And obviously they had to, bring my belongings in my hut. And then they had a few conversations with my family, and then they left.
Oh,
It was the scariest moment of
wow.
my life because I'm thinking to myself, here am I already, even though I passed the proficiency test, like in terms of knowing more than basic language, like basic phrases to make conversations, I wasn't yet confident, and I'm thinking to myself, but this is what life is about. Sometimes you're not always, you can prepare as much as you want and still not feel ready. And I was afraid when I closed the door to my hut. I was afraid because I thought to myself, how am I going to be of service to them? Is my presence going to make an impact here? I started thinking about these things even before I even knew that I was going to undertake some projects 3 months later. I did not even think about, I was just trying to figure out, are we going to build, how are we going to build rapport? Are we going to find aspects of ourselves that we want to hold on to in our interactions? Because I truly believe every time you talk to someone, there's something once you leave the room that they holding on to. And
Right.
I kept thinking, well, once we leave those conversations, are we going to hold on to something that's going to transcend those cultural or systemic barriers that were there at the time? Because of the fact that I was the only American in my community. And even if they had, a Peace Corps volunteer before I came to the site, I was the first woman volunteer that they've had. And so again, given the cultural context, I kept thinking, am I going to be accepted?
Right.
And if I'm not going to be accepted, what am I going to do next?
Right. Okay. So I want you to tell me what is, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, MESFAMI Care?
MESFAMI Care Inc.
Yes. What is that all about?
So MESFAMI Care Inc. Is a passion project of mine that I created after my mother passed away, because I thought that there may be families out there who are having a tough time having access to health resources. I definitely know my family did in trying to, figure out if there were any services that would help us, that would sustain us during this difficult time. And so I didn't want someone else to go through that. And so I decided, after, again, like trying to pull myself together, processing this grief, that I was going to put something in place. And so that's where MESFAMI Care came to be born. We're still much in the preliminary phase. I definitely know I need more support, to make it into a global network, because I would want this to be replicated in other countries where people also, and again, I also create a Facebook group attached to this page, where people can talk about mental health, and they can talk about, based on the current climate that we live in, what are some of the challenges that people are having in accessing mental health or behavioral health services, as they've called it now. And again, if there is a gap in coverage, if there is a gap in access, like, what are we doing as a community to close the gap? What are some of these services? What could some of these services do better to serve different communities who need it?
Okay, excellent. So let's move on to the reason I brought you on was this excellent article, The Struggle of Black Men with the Mental Health Industry. Why did you write the article?
I wrote the article because it hits close home, because I know there are many people I have come to know who have had challenges, and most of them are Black men. And what I've noticed throughout the years is that there was always a stigma around it. There was also like some sort of discomfort when a man would say, "I'm not feeling okay today." And it made me think, well, why are Black men afraid to have these tough conversations with each other? Especially when I mentioned in the article that this is just a reflection of what has happened to us during slavery. We were not taught to say anything, because every time we said something, there was a punishment attached to it. And I sometimes ask myself, is that behavior generational and cyclical? Because I haven't seen many Black men. I'm sure, like, there is a movement definitely around it. I mean, you have stars like Kid Cudi. I might be saying the name wrong, and other folks who have come forward to talk about their mental health. You have even Taraji P. Henson, who created a foundation, talking related to mental health. And so there is a movement, for people to start talking about that, because of the fact that we're seeing the negative outcomes when we choose to become silent, and also there is a surge in, people who are committing suicides, or people who are ending up homeless. And again, the question always becomes, well, how did you end up here? How did you end up here? And also, now that you're here, are you getting the support and the need that you deserve? And there are, health centers that are funded to provide those resources, the help, the emotional support, if you will, to homeless individuals, but it's seldom talked about in the media. And so we don't really know the breadth and the depth of the work these wonderful community health centers are doing for these specific groups of individuals.
Okay.
And so this is the reason why I wanted to talk about it, because I know that my article is not a definitive guide to mental health, but I wanted to start the conversation.
Okay.
Because I figured by starting the conversation, maybe other people might, want to continue to explore the different components of mental health, and how can we better support our brothers and sisters who are going through that.
Why do you focus specifically on Black men when it comes to mental health? Why the focus on Black men?
Because when you look at a series of studies, most of the time they only focus on Black women. And I didn't see many studies, except maybe a couple, where they were trying to explore, Black men's perceptions of mental health. But then again, they tell you in the limitation, like in the discussion section, that there's so much more research that needs to be done, tailored towards Black men, because Black men are, what am I trying to say, are not underutilized, but they are difficult to recruit for research projects. And also because of the Tuskegee syphilis research study, where even though there's a growing number of behavioral health services being provided, and that should also be included through the Affordable Care Act, but the system has not gained the trust of Black men, because not many Black men are seeking that support. As a matter of fact, in that specific study, a couple of them said that, some of them did seek support, but they didn't feel like they could relate, to their provider, to their physician, socioculturally and economically, which also begs the question, how come we're not advertising more on the number of Black mental health providers who are out there?
Well, you're reading my mind. Sorry to interrupt, but you are reading my mind, because I was going to bring it up, and you mentioned it in the article about the lack of African American mental health professionals. So I guess it's a concern I have. Why do you feel there are so few African American health professionals?
I thought that there were so few because of the fact that it's not heavily advertised. Like if I go to a community health center, or when I did at some point, and I asked them for a list, there were no, because they provided the name and the picture. There were no African American mental health providers. And it started to make me question, well, if they're out there, how come no one knows about them? Or if we do, how come it's by word of mouth? Because I don't think it should be by word of mouth. It should be advertised. So, and also it begs the question, where are they located as well? Because if we look at just the medical field, it's hard to recruit physicians to work in rural communities.
Right.
And so knowing that, how are these people able to seek support or seek behavioral health services? Because even if you have telemedicine, which is becoming like a popular term these days, that people are using, and it's something that the medical field is thinking of, is leaning towards in order to make healthcare more accessible. But then again, who are the providers? And are they reflective of the populations they serve?
It's a twofold, and there's two things I want to continue on with this, and I'll go on this avenue first. In regards to getting certification, accreditation when it comes to mental health, it's not cheap.
It's not.
So if you look at college is not cheap, and post-secondary education is not cheap. So how much of an impact does that have in the lack of African American health professionals?
I think that's where we have to look into programs. There are postgraduate programs that are tailored specifically towards recruiting African American medical providers. And so now the other question becomes, do they have that in psychiatry or psychology, in those types of fields? Do they have these programs to recruit more African American students? And also, we also have to look at the admissions process. What is that like for them?
Okay. And it's funny, there was a story on NPR earlier this week, and I'm trying to find it as we're having our conversation here, about how Black men who had Black doctors had better health results. And I think that you're mirroring that in this conversation you're having here, because one of the reasons that are preventing Black men to get the help that they need. Those who have mental health challenges, they can't see someone that looks like them out there in the doctor's office.
Right, right. And this is something that, like I said, I think people are becoming more cognizant of that. Um, they starting to ask themselves the same questions that we're coming up with in this conversation. But again, it's very nebulous. The process itself is very, the topic itself is very nebulous because once again, we don't know where these providers are providing that care.
Okay.
And then are they within reach? Because that's another social barrier. If, for example, someone doesn't have a car, how can they reach that mental health provider? So there are so many different systemic barriers that could impede someone from accessing those health services, including but not excluding socioeconomic status.
Then, and one of the terms you use in your article is called cultural competency when it comes to training in the area of mental health. Can you expand what you mean by that?
When I mentioned cultural competency in the article, I was specifically referring to, certain just training medical providers to be sensitive, to the belief, to the belief systems, the practices of other cultures, to keep that in mind when they are delivering care to these groups of individuals. Just like, for example, when someone passes away, there are certain cultures where, they have to be, they bring many people, they have to bring their community into the room, into the hospital room to be with the body. And for the American, like in the American culture, it may seem a little bit um, abnormal. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's out of the norm for them, but being respectful of that. And I think that's why this training needs to start when people go to medical school, not after and they out in the field, again, developing their clinical skills. I think this is something that needs to be incorporated in the curriculum of every medical student.
I just want to, before we go on here, two people I want to shout out here on the Get Vocal platform. Stephen from the Tech Buzz team. Anytime you catch Stephen online, and Marty at the Tech Buzz, if you want to get a good understanding about technical stuff, especially live streaming, don't have to go any further than those two gentlemen. They are outstanding at what they do and how they serve. And also we have on YouTube, we have Paul Johnson. He is saying here there are Black men who want help, but society doesn't care about Black men. What do you feel about that statement that society doesn't care about Black men when it comes to mental health?
I think also I'm trying to give the system the benefit of the doubt. I cannot say that society doesn't care about Black men, even though there have been several instances where I think the system has failed us in many ways. It has not protected Black men in general. And you can see that in terms of, mass incarceration. There are more Black men in prison than any other minorities. But I wouldn't say that society does not care about Black men. I think if I'm going to go based on trying to find opportunities in every challenges, if I'm going to use this framework, it's important for Black men to start these conversations within their own social groups and try to figure out if we're going to expand even further, where are these resources that they need to have access to? Who can they go to have access to these resources? Because again, trying to tackle the system as a whole is a huge task. And I think that what would be more logical at this point is to start within your own community, trying to find these resources within your own community, or these people you can talk to who know people who can provide that help and support.
You also,
But absolutely, I understand where this person is coming from. I think that the system has failed us in many ways. And yes, there is a strong argument that maybe society does not care for Black men. But again, since I know that changing the system is a Herculean feat, it might be better to just start off at the community level.
okay. Uh, you also mentioned, of course, the hot button phrase in this article. You say toxic masculinity. How has this impacted what you feel is the challenge when it comes to Black men in the mental health industry? What angle do you have on that?
I think when I think of Black men and toxic masculinity is again going back to the fact that Black men think that if they say, for example, that they are depressed, that somehow they will be perceived as being weak. But then again, you have to always trace, current behaviors to past, circumstances, and you have to always go back to history. Black men have always been economically at a disadvantage. This is how, and again, this is subject for debate. But since slavery, Black men were treated as powerless human beings. They were not even treated as human beings. They were just treated as personal property. And so again, it begs the question, when someone has gone through that sort of trauma, because that's what I call it, trauma, like this is the ripple effect that you get. You get people who just are not comfortable with addressing, how they feeling. And I'm not saying all Black men are like that, but for those who have not come out of their shells yet, the question is what's holding them back. And that's why I talk about toxic masculinity, because again, it's not talked about enough, where the topic has become normalized for people to, or for Black men in general, to support other Black men when they talk about these issues. And I think there needs to be more advocacy on that.
So just as you say there, it's not talked about. What are the barriers within the Black, I don't like saying community, Black environment, that it's this topic is not being discussed? It's almost like the elephant in the room syndrome. It's so prevalent, but it's not being talked about between Blacks, not only between Black men, but just Blacks in general.
I personally think that maybe it's not being talked about because there's a fear. There's a fear that of being judged. There's a fear that they will be judged. There's a fear that they will be either seen as crazy, put them further at a disadvantage, may hurt. Because again, when I think about mental health, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a Black man. You're trying to think about the future. You're trying to think about, okay, what is going to be the impact? If I go ahead and say that I have depression, like what's going to be the ripple effect, in the long run? How's that going to affect my family? How's that going to affect my community? How am I going to be perceived? There's a fear of being judged. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it may not be talked about within the Black environment.
Okay. I want to read one of the paragraphs here, which is very powerful. So if you allow me, I'm going to read it, if you don't mind, from your article.
Please do.
Okay. The paragraph starts here. The Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health mentions that about 1/4 of African Americans seek mental health care, compared to 40% of whites. These facts tell us a grim story. Black men remain the most marginalized groups in seeking support for mental health. Black men are attacked, gunned down, and suspected of misdemeanor more than any other racial group, or than any racial groups. These set of circumstances pins them as cogs in an elaborate machine that spits them out and undervalues their worth. When one looks at the various ways Black men are portrayed from social media to news outlets, their marginalization would be conducive to them feeling powerless and fearful of seeking support. The institutions that promise to protect them are the ones that ultimately induce harm by placing them on the back burner. Wow. That's very powerful. That is really, really powerful. 1/4. Wow, that's a big amount.
That is a big amount.
And so what are some of the negative effects to this 1/4 of African Americans, especially when you talk about Black men? What are some of the downsides with so many Black or a number of Black men, African American men, having mental health challenges? What are some of the things that are not good that are happening out there?
I mean, from what I've read, and just like based on observations, like when a Black man does not have the social support, in order to cope with the many vicissitudes of life and the many stresses of life. Because I think another thing too that we're not talking about enough is, Black men face discrimination, not just in the workplace, but just in general in many different settings. And that, coupled with whatever they deal with on a personal level, could lead someone to have depression. But when the person doesn't even have that social support system to begin with, it leads them to isolation. And anything could happen when a person is isolated. And I know that one of the many ways that people will say to fix that is to bring them back into the community. But this is very difficult for a Black man, because you bring him back to a community that's not where most people are not talking about it. So even within a group setting, the Black men would feel isolated. And so it's very dangerous because of the fact that, you're seeing a high rates of suicide. I mean, you also seen children committing suicides. And that's also another topic that maybe we could discuss another time, but mental health with mental health in children, because they also, and they are even more at a disadvantage because they have no sense of agency over themselves. And so how do you protect this population as well?
Well, and I just pulling from your article here, suicide rates amongst Black youth have skyrocketed since 2017, as early as 9 years old, through cyberbullying.
There have been many instances of cyberbullying this year and even last year. It hasn't, the rate has not, we haven't seen a decline yet. We've seen like just an uprise, and it's making people question, what is happening, what is happening within that environment that's leading a child to commit suicide. And that's why I feel like healing starts at the community level. It doesn't always start, I mean, yes, ideally you would want the top-down approach, someone at the top dictating that this is an important topic that we need to address, and then filter it through all of these different health centers or health institutions so that they can deliver these services and target these specific groups of people. But healing, I think, if healing is to take place for Black men, it has to start at the community level. We need to start having more of these discussions. We need to have more forums targeting, specifically talking about them. And also, it's most important for them to hear the message from other men.
Let me ask you too, the whole aspect of CTE and Black men's mental health. what do you like to share? You do talk about it in the article, but what would you like to share with our audience in regards to that? I've done some conversations in the past with white individuals, especially those who've had uh, especially particularly white men, pass away that they know or relatives in regards to football,
Mm.
soccer, and how much of an issue is CTE and mental health with Black males? How much of an issue or a growing issue is that becoming?
There's not much talk about it. I think when you look at some of the articles that talk about CTE, they just give you a general overview of what it is and then who it has been affecting, but they never really talk specifically about Black men. Like I had to just do some more in-depth research, to find, some of the athletes who have had it, or people who are currently living with it. And so the information is not, I guess, readily available on social media. You would have to, or just the news outlet platform, you would have to go and look at the archives and the, journal articles that are published in the Journal of Men's Health, for example, and look for that information. But CTE, cannot be diagnosed until someone, passes away.
Right.
And I think there's ongoing research on trying to find out ways that we can detect it while someone is living. But again, the research on that is, it's substantial, but again, the solution to this challenge is minimal.
So I have a concern here because, and a two-part concern, out of, in fact, many concerns, but one of the main ones is, in order for this challenge to be overcome, it's going to take funding, right? It's going to take money. And I'm living here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Yes, Raptors won the NBA championship, whatever. And but the
Congratulations.
Thank you. But here we go. From where I sit, I'm seeing more and more cutbacks in healthcare in the United States. So isn't there going in the opposite direction on what needs to be happening in regards to this, to overcoming Black men's challenges with mental health?
Yes, we are definitely going the opposite way, like you said, because by cutting some components of the ACA, studies have shown that it's also going to impact severely behavioral health services because, again, under the Affordable Care Act, there, primary care services and behavioral services in most cases are included together. And I can draw on several examples having lived in Boston. There's certain community health centers where behavioral health services and primary preventative services are provided in the same place. And so there's a coordinated care that's happening in those specific community health centers. But then it depends on your state. And also we have to take into account that 18 states did not expand Medicaid eligibility to their population. And so these people are even more vulnerable because of the fact that, they would have access to these behavioral health services under Medicaid. And so which is funded by the federal government and statewide as well. By the state and the federal government. So it depends. The coverage is what we were talking about. The healthcare coverage will differ from state to state.
Right. Okay.
So.
Well, I want to start winding down the conversation because you've had a long day as always. But I'm liking what you're saying because I think there's future conversations, especially about the whole area of young Blacks and young African Americans and suicide. I think that's a very important topic. And if you're comfortable, I'd love you to come back and share about that.
Absolutely.
It's very important.
Absolutely.
But in regards to this topic, what are some calls to action that you would like to make in regards to Black men and mental health, in regards to eradicating or reducing this challenge?
I think I would recommend, again, it all starts with the training, training medical providers to see Black men not as abrasive, aggressive people or people that they need to be afraid of, because that's the portrayal that social media has been pushing when it comes to
Well, media in general,
depicting
right?
media in general, like in terms of portraying Black men in that light, and that's not true. And so really looking at the training that these medical providers are receiving during their medical training. Also, being more transparent as to where these Black mental health or providers providing behavioral health services are. Like, where are they in each state? And I think there needs to be more transparency instead of the information being shared by word of mouth. And then also to creating more forums, where Black men who are comfortable talking about this, to come in so that they can serve as an example to other fellow Black men. And start these conversations. It doesn't always have to be in a public space. I mean, it could be in your living room. It could be, at a cookout when you're having, when you're talking to some of your friends. But the conversation needs to be had because we're seeing the negative effects when we become silent in our own communities. And so those are the major, I would say, recommendations that I have in terms of making sure that Black men feel supported and feel cared for. And again, in addressing mental health. And I also think that policy-wise, there needs to be more policy geared towards discussing mental health policy, mental health in vulnerable communities. And then also, if they could make an assessment, on how the lack of mental, of policy on behavioral health services is impacting different groups within the minority population. And then what are some targeted actions or targeted programs that they could put in place. Again, as you said, they need to be funded, but they could put in place for these people.
Okay. And finally, in regard to what calls to actions or suggestions do you have for Black men who are looking to get patient care when it comes to mental health?
I think being outspoken in terms of, I think one of the first things that I did when I went to a community health center is ask them to be connected to a mental health provider who was Black. So being upfront about that, and also doing the self-assessment questionnaire, because every time you go to as a new patient, or even if you're an existing patient, they will always give you this questionnaire that you need to fill out, to talking about your physical health history. And there's a section where they talk about whether or not you have experienced, some of the following, and depression was one of them, schizophrenia, and there are like a couple of other options. Being transparent in those health questionnaires, so that when you get to meet your primary care physician, it will prompt them to start a conversation. And if they don't, then it is up to you to say something and see where the path leads you. Because again, if you don't ask, you will not know the resources that are out there. And I think that's important for people to take into consideration, which is, again, going back to not waiting for the system to do something for you, but trying to figure out what the resources are right where you are and tapping into those social support systems.
Okay. Well, one last question for you. A good associate of mine, a woman of color, said to me the other day, she said this statement, I would like to get your feedback on it. She says that every Black person should have a therapist. What do you think?
I could not agree more. I think every Black person should have a therapist.
Why?
Because I think that we need to have spaces where we can address our own fears, our own challenges, our own doubts, and then like seek healing. That's why I was very careful to say from the beginning, healing starts at the community level. It starts at the individual level. You have to want to be healed. You have to want to seek that help and that support. But then after that, let's try to find out the resources within the community and that you can tap into, so that you can start your healing process or your healing journey. But I think definitely everyone should have a therapist.
All right. Well, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. We'll end on that note. I'd like to say thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to hang out with the Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations, and the people here. And like to say that I'm looking forward to having you on again. I know it was crazy getting the schedules on, and you were so complimentary, saying, "Oh, it's so nice for you to be wanting to have me on," and I believe you did an outstanding job. And
Thank you.
if people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
They can go on all the social media handles, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, by typing my name, which is provided on this conversation.
Yes, and I will provide that on the post that I'm going to do for the replay of this epic conversation. She will be back. I did put, if you're on Get Vocal Live right now, the link to the article she did on the Good Men Project. That's how I found out about her, and I said, "Bam! I gotta get her on." And I've been a contributor, featured contributor at the Good Men Project for now over 6 years. So it's a great place, especially if you want to read articles about men and manhood. Excellent place. By the way, how did you get that article on there? I found that interesting. How did that happen?
I just pitched the article to them,
Good.
after I wrote it, and then literally I think within 2 weeks,
No,
I got an email saying that they had received it and they approved it and that they would get back to me if there were some major edits. But they never got back to me for major edits. They just published it and sent me the
wonderful.
link.
Excellent.
So
That's good. That is good stuff. Well, another epic conversation is done. It's Dr. Vibe here, the host of Epic Conversations at the home of Epic Conversations. Before we sign off, I'd just like to shout out a few people. Stephen from the Tech Buzz, Big Bad Brad, and also Bobby, who are watching this epic conversation on the Get Vocal platform. And then I'm just going to pull up, we had on YouTube for watching a lot of this conversation and really enjoying it. Gentleman's name is, let me just pull it up, Paul Johnson. And he said, yes, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for the shout out. This is a topic that needs to be discussed. And he's asking for a part 2.
okay.
Are you up for that? Are you up for a
I
part
am
2?
definitely up for it. I
Okay,
definitely am up for it.
wonderful. I'm very blessed to have a great community. They say what's on their heart and their mind. And they when they want more, they tell me. When they don't want more, they tell me. So you're on the good side of the books. All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Dr. Vibe here. I'm on many different platforms, but I make it easy. If you want to find out more about the Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations, just go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. You can also catch you can catch replays, my audio replays on different platforms, but just go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. You'll catch everything there. I'm a featured contributor on the Get Vocal platform and also featured contributor at the Good Men Project. There's a lot more, but go to the website. Let's shout it out and close it out like this. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions, and then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. God bless, peace be well, walk good. No, God bless, peace be well, keep the faith and walk good. And again, thanks for watching live, listening live, and watching on the replay and listening on the replay. Next conversation I have coming up on the Get Vocal platform is tomorrow, June 15th. And what we have coming up on June 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm hosting a cross-Canada conversation for Black Canadians on immigration, branding Black, which is business-wise, branding Black people, branding themselves, and finally, the UN decade for, I have to remember the correct title, for people of African descent. So that's tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, June 15th, on the Get Vocal platform. I'll be hosting a cross-Canada conversation for Black Canadians. So if you're available, check it out, and we'll catch you soon. God bless, peace, be well, keep the faith, again, and walk good. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.